country, that we are a nation that believes in the rule of law, and we hold people accountable for their conduct. So this was absolutely necessary as far as I'm concerned. I agree with some of your guests that I think that the judge here knows what's at stake. I think the judge understands that there are rights to be protected for the defendant, but that the American public, before they're asked to vote, needs to know the full character of Donald Trump. And therefore, it's one thing, it's certainly easier to be indicted than it is to be convicted. So I think the judge is going to do everything she can to make sure that this trial occurs and is completed before the election.
You, I'm sure, have read the indictment. What do you think? Do you think it's a strong case?
Well, again, yes, it's a strong case. But it's one thing to prepare an indictment that is then issued by the grand jury. But of course, the question is how much of the evidence, and of course, there's evidence that's not included in the indictment, but how much of the evidence are you going to be able to get into trial? And of course, all of the testimony, all of the evidence is going to be challenged by the defense. And so it's a very strong case. It's a great story, but I think there are some challenges here for the prosecution, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. This, it's unprecedented. People have talked about this is momentous, unprecedented, and it certainly is. But from my perspective, what I'm most worried about is the fact that. All of the rhetoric that's out there today, in my judgment, the attacks against the Department of Justice, the attacks against the rule of law, I think it's very, very dangerous. And I'm hopeful that we can get our leaders to step up and tell people to calm down. If they're going to communicate with each other, do it with civility and respect, and try to come to an understanding. The defense has an opportunity to present its side of the story. Jack Smith will have an opportunity to present the side of the prosecution, and then we'll see what happens before a jury of President Trump's peers.
And just to be clear, those attacks, the rhetorical attacks, are coming from the defendant, and they're coming from House Republicans, even some members of the House Republican leadership.
Oh, I agree, but listen, I also agree. I'm hearing more and more from Republicans, people that I know well, that I trust, who are questioning some of the decisions by the Department of Justice, in that they really do view some of the decisions as to be favoritism towards this administration, and I think that's dangerous. Obviously, whether or not, as John Bolton, I think, rightly put it, the fact that Hunter Biden might get a sweetheart deal doesn't mean that Donald Trump should get a pass. I think both should be held fully accountable. People should have confidence in decisions at the Department of Justice that are not biased in any way, and that people are held accountable for their conduct.
Attorney General Alberta Gonzales, thank you so much. As we can see, the motorcade containing the 45th President of the United States as he proceeds from the Prettyman Courthouse in Washington, D.C., back to the President's Boeing on the tarmac at Reagan National Airport in Virginia is proceeding. Caitlin Collins, over to you.
Yeah, Jake, after that 27-minute proceeding and one guilty plea, he is now leaving. We do expect him to speak when he gets to the airport. We'll obviously monitor that. But we do have Caitlin Collins here with us, who is one of just about 50 reporters in that room as the former president was pleading not guilty to that second set of federal charges. Caitlin Collins, what did you say?
Well, Donald Trump is about to speak, or may speak. He actually spoke in court several times. He was addressed directly by the judge, who called him Mr. Trump throughout, and he was asked to state his name, Donald J. Trump. John, he said, that was how he phrased it. And then he had to say his age. He had to say that he had not had any alcohol or medication before this hearing, knew exactly what was going on, that he was aware of what was going on around him. He also was the person who formally entered his pleading when he was told his charges and said, do you understand these? What do you plead to these 4 counts? He said very clearly, very articulated with a pause, not guilty. And then that was the bulk of what was this hearing. It was Trump being addressed directly. He also was told directly by the judge that he should be able to acknowledge or he acknowledged that he has a right to remain silent, that he understands that things that he says, especially to law enforcement, could be held against him in a court of law. He said, yes, he understood that. And he also was asked to confirm that he understood it would be a crime to retaliate against any witnesses in this case or even to intimidate some potential jurors. He said he understood that as well. So just hearing Trump's voice in that court, it is unmistakably his voice. You can hear it. You could even hear him a little bit, even before the proceeding, as he was whispering. He was quite animated as we were waiting for the proceeding to start. There were several minutes of wait time before the judge took the bench. Trump was in the room. Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, he was also in the room. They had a clear view of one another, and so Trump spent a lot of time looking directly at Jack Smith, then speaking to his attorneys. Jack Smith was also quite animated in conversation, appeared to be extremely relaxed, even had his arm up on the bench. He was smiling afterwards as he had sat in the counsel table in the well. But Donald Trump was in court. He didn't seem to be as in foul of a mood as he was whenever we witnessed him in court in Florida for his previous arraignment. But this really was a somber proceeding where he was asked to be directly engaged with what was going on there, with the charges he faces. Actually, one more thing that I noticed was as he's waiting for the judge, there was a large stack of papers in front of him, sitting in front. Started sort of fiddling with it. He was fidgeting around, and then he looked down and was clearly reading what was on the paper, and then lifted it up in front of him, and I could see it was the indictment itself.
And Evan said he seemed a bit angry about something that he saw in that paper, that he was referencing Todd Blanchard there. But the biggest headline coming out of this is how very clearly the judge was talking about the speed of what this trial could look like. She's not the judge who will oversee it, but she had consulted with that judge, and there was a back and forth with her and Trump's attorney over that. What did that look like?
That's right. So that was a back and forth that happened at the end of the hearing, and it was a dispute that's going to bubble up a couple times in this case, in that there is right now the Justice Department wanting this to be a speedy trial. They're ready to hand over evidence to the defense, even evidence they're not entitled to yet. And the defense, they clearly are saying in court, we want this to be a fair and just process. We need to know about the magnitude of evidence, and we want to be able to take our time to prepare ourselves and our clients to go to jail. Now, this was not something that was resolved today. They are going to talk about it, and this next hearing is going to be set before Judge Tanya Chutkan. She's the one that's ultimately going to be setting a trial date. They have a hearing scheduled before her for the end of August, and at that hearing, she is going to want to address setting a trial date. That was made quite clear in court by the magistrate judge today, that that date for a trial, we will get it very, very likely by the end of this month.
Yeah, and Anderson, that's just 25 days from now, of course.
It is a quick timeline. Let's go to Kristen Holmes, who is in the motorcade that we are seeing some of her shot right now. Kristen, explain where you are, what's going on.
Anderson, yeah, we're on the fastest ride to the airport I've ever had. They've closed down all the streets. We're in the back of the motorcade. We saw a Trump vehicle pull out from the courthouse. He was underground. We were staging out behind him. And we are heading to DCA, the airport here, to hear him give remarks. I talked to an advisor who absolutely be giving remarks, but they did say we don't know which Trump is going to show up, and that is because at times Trump has been defiant when it comes to these arraignments, these indictments. At times he has been angry and frustrated, and at times he's ignored it altogether and just focused on the 2024 campaign. Now, they said that he was ramped up, which we saw on the plane ride here. He was watching the media coverage, talking to his lawyers, and we saw that because of his tweets on Truth Social or his posts on Truth Social. He kind of snarky, almost making light of the fact that these were indictments. But they say that obviously that could change. And as we heard our colleague Evan Perez saying, he seems to be almost upset at times during his court appearance. He had his hands together. I think I heard another guest say that he seemed like he might have been humbled. Now, I don't think we're going to see a humbled Donald Trump deliver remarks. They've been covering him for a long time, and that's not one of the personalities that we see. But it will be interesting. We'll get a good read on how this went for him and what he feels from seeing these remarks.
And Kristen, just to be clear, you said he's going to be making remarks where at the airport before taking off?
Yep, we will be getting out of the motorcade as soon as we get there. We'll bring, we believe, on deliver remarks. And again, Anderson, this is very different than what we've seen last two indictments, he's had these big parties at Bedminster, at Mar-a-Lago, with hundreds of guests, biggest fans, where he's delivered, speech and had guests drinking, hanging out. That's obviously not what he's doing here.
All right, we're having problems with Kristen's audio. We'll check back in with her. Joining me now is Neil Katyal, the former acting U.S. Solicitor General during the Obama administration. He's the host of Courtside podcast on Substack. Neil, thanks very much for being with us. The judge signaled she wants this trial to move quickly, set the next hearing date for August 28th. Realistically, do you think this trial will commence and be over before Election Day?
I do. So I think that this trial doesn't have the procedural complexities of classified information and the other things that are issued in the Florida Stolen Documents case. And I do think that this judge was signaling, this magistrate judge had talked to the presiding judge, Judge Chatkin, over this case. And I think all indications are that they wanted to move this thing more quickly. She's going to hear from Donald Trump's lawyers on the 28th, or I think there's going to be a brief filed even before that, for why there should be some delay. But there's no argument for much delay here. Certainly not, something past December, I'd say, of this year. Trump's lawyers have been signaling that, it's been 2.5 years that the prosecution's gotten to investigate, so we should get 2.5 years also. And the criminal law does not work that way for obvious reasons. Investigations sometimes take time, but there's no parallel requirement that the defense gets the same time. So I do think all indications are this thing is going to be tried just as any other criminal case would be tried in the next year.
The arguments we're hearing from Trump's legal team, as well as his supporters and backers on Capitol Hill, essentially they say he has a First Amendment right to say things that are not true, that no one can prove he didn't actually believe the election was stolen, and that he was listening to bad advice from his lawyers, advice of counsel. Do those work?
Yeah. So far, I haven't heard a credible story for any of those arguments, Anderson. So the First Amendment has been litigated a lot in conspiracy cases. Defendants all the time say, it was just speech. All I was doing was speech. And what the courts routinely do is they say, not if it has some sort of action component to it. Like if I order you to murder someone, that's just my speech. But it's, of course, a crime. It's a crime committed through speech. And here, the indictment, starting at page 2, says, look, we are not punishing Donald Trump for his speech. He can say whatever he wants. It's what he did with that speech. It's the commencement of actions. It's the fake electors plot. It's trying to interfere with the counting of votes on January 6th and the like. And then as for the state of mind defense that Trump legitimately thought that he won the election, I think there are two big problems with that. One is the factual problem that the indictment really lays out, which is everyone who's anyone told Donald Trump he lost. That includes the Attorney General at the time, his top lawyer at the White House counsel, the national intelligence officials, the election security officials, all sorts of people. And indeed, Donald Trump himself, according to the indictment, believes he lost. But there's lots of indications of that, including telling Vice President Pence, the problem with you is you're too honest. The other is a practical problem. As an attorney, if I wanted put on one of my clients to say I had a reasonable good faith belief in something, I'd put them on the stand. But you can't, if you're an attorney for Donald Trump, risk putting Donald Trump on the stand. You'd have to worry he's going to perjure himself. And so there isn't a viable way really to put this defense, I think, forward. And that's why we see, Anderson, a pivot toward new arguments that Donald Trump is making today about venue, that this trial shouldn't take place in Washington, D.C., it should take place in West Virginia because people politically like him more in West Virginia. That is not a legal argument. That will go nowhere. Kind of version of that argument was tried in the George Floyd case, in which I was special prosecutor, that you couldn't try it there because the community was biased against the officers, and the courts routinely rejected that, and they will reject it here every day of every week.
Do you expect more charges to be added later, as we saw in the classified documents case? I mean, obviously there are 6 co-conspirators cited in this. None of them, as we know, have been charged.
Yeah, so there's something called the superseding indictment, and that is what Jack Smith used in Florida. And what that means is it's essentially an updated set of charges. And you can have more charges, that is more crimes, you can also have more people added to it. So Jack Smith did both last week in Florida, signaling he's willing to do that. And I suspect here, at least, we're going to see, Anderson, some more defendants in the days to come. That is, this indictment was lean and mean. It just went after one person, Donald Trump. It was a pared-down indictment. And I think that was done because Jack Smith wants the timing of this, as you were asking me earlier, to be soon for this trial. And when you have multiple defendants, as we saw in the George Floyd case, there's a risk it can slow things down. So Smith wants to move quickly in this one particular case. But those 6 people are named are identified in the indictment as committing very serious crimes. And I suspect that if they don't flip, which means to go and help Jack Smith build the case against the currently indicted person, Donald Trump, we will see indictments for those people as well. And then, if any of them do flip, that will provide new information, possibly for new charges against Donald Trump. And of course, Jack Smith may uncover more evidence of other crimes that Donald Trump has committed as he continues his investigation and prosecution.
Neil, I just wanted to tell our viewers, the former president is expected to speak. We're not going to bring those comments live. We're going to monitor what he says. Anything that's newsworthy, we will turn that around and bring it to our viewers. Just finally, Neil, if you believe that this will go to trial before the election, looking at the indictment as you've read it now, how strong a case is this against the former president?
Incredibly strong. The charges are straightforward. They're narrow, but boy, they pack a punch. And the indictment's really clean and calculated, and I think almost certain to result in a conviction. Of course, Donald Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence, Anderson, and all the criminal protections that our system gives, which are overwhelming. So Jack Smith has to prove to a jury of 12 people that Donald Trump committed these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest standard in our law. It means it's more than 50%. It's very sky high. And he's got to do it for every one of the 12 jurors. If one of those jurors says, no, I don't believe Trump did it, Trump goes free. And yet, having read this indictment and having listened to Trump's lawyers the last couple of days, I've seen no real legal defense. I've seen a very strong political defense that the Biden Justice Department is going after.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very sad day.
That's all I think.
We just saw the former president actually being handed an umbrella by his co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, in the documents case, which is just an interesting detail to note. Neil Katyal, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back with the panel here in New York. Congressman Kinzinger, I mean, given all your work on the January 6th committee, as I assume a lifelong Republican or a very long-term Republican, what do you make of what we've seen this morning or this afternoon?
Well, I mean, first off, I'm happy that justice is happening. I'm sad that my party is where it is now, and I think anybody, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or something else, should be sad about this because this country needs 2 strong parties. And what you see is a party that is not worried about the Constitution, is totally focused on the wishes and the whims of one man. And to me, it's very sad. I'd be, frankly, just as sad if this was the Democratic Party doing it. I was struck by something as we were sitting here and kind of watching the motorcade go, which is there were a lot of Metro police out, and there were, I even think, some Capitol police out kind of guarding that area. Those are the people that fought to defend the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, the Capitol Police were fighting hard. Metro PD came in at literally exactly the right time to be able to stop, the further violence, and to then watch them, because they're so good and professional and do their jobs, but standing out there kind of making way and guarding the former president who launched that attack. It goes to show their professionalism, but it's also the whole irony and the sadness of what's happened.
To see Walt Nauta, we were wondering earlier, would he be there today? I mean, it's the strangeness of Trump world that his co-conspirators are around him.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I have to wonder how he could even be staying in the boundaries of what the judge in Florida had restricted him to when he's spending all of this time with a man who's still working under him, whose attorneys he's paying for. But building off of something Adam said, I just feel myself coming back to the fact that this is such a significant day. I don't want us to ever take for granted the fact that Mike Pence did the right thing, democracy hung in the balance, and what if he had not?
That's right.
What if this had gone back to the states? I mean, the indictment reads with one of the attorneys warning, there would be violence in every major city. People have fought wars. They have bled in this country for the right to vote, for the right to be represented. And I just don't know that we've thoroughly as a country wrapped our heads around how close it got. And I highlight that because, again, he is likely the nominee for the Republican Party. And there's no promise that if he loses to Joe Biden, he might not try to incite something again. Or, of course, if he wins, what that could look like.
The former president did make a brief statement before getting on the plane, which he's on now. I just want to play you what he said.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very sad day for America. And it was also very sad driving through Washington, D.C. and seeing the filth and the decay and all of the broken buildings and walls and the graffiti. This is not the place that I left. It's a very sad thing to see it. When you look at what's happening, this is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America. This is the persecution of the person that's leading by very, very substantial numbers in the Republican primary and leading Biden by a lot. So if you can't beat him, you persecute him or you prosecute him. We can't let this happen in America. Thank you very much.
Do you want these trials to happen?
We should point out that when the former president left office and left Washington, D.C., the city was on lockdown because of the attack on January 6th. That is the city he left behind. Ellie?
Well, we've heard this from Donald Trump every single time. He just used the phrase persecution. He continues to and will continue to attack the prosecutors, law enforcement, the judge, and anyone else who may hold him accountable. I think it's our job to call it out every time, first of all, for being irresponsible, reckless, and potentially dangerous. We've seen, Adam knows firsthand, that people listen to these words, act on these words. Ultimately, though, there will be accountability. And again, one of the things about our criminal justice system, there's a resolution. There's not many arenas, professions in this world where at the end somebody says, you win, you lose. We will have a verdict. I don't know.
We heard the former acting Solicitor General under President Obama, Neil Katyal, saying he believes this will go to trial before the election and will resolve itself before the election.
I don't know about that. I mean, Donald Trump's team has estimated the trial will take 9 months. That's high. However, I've tried cases nowhere near this level of importance or scope that took 4 or 5 months. So let's cut that in half. Let's say 4 months, 5 months. I don't know where there's a 4 or 5 month gap. Let me say it differently. There is not a 4 or 5 month open gap on the calendar, given the way things stand right now. Manhattan, the hush money case, that has March and April. Right after that, the Mar-a-Lago case has May. That'll take into June and July. There's not a 4 or 5 month gap to realistically try this case on either side. However, those trial dates can move. Trial dates move all the time. Jack Smith could certainly prioritize which of his cases he wants to put first,
Karen,
but it's ultimately up to a judge.
What do you think about the timeline?
Yeah, I think the judges are going to talk. I think it's common for judges to talk and work out schedules. And
it certainly seems like the New York case, Alvin Bragg, would be something that they would put on hold.
Again, it's up to the judges, but Judge Merchan is a reasonable judge, and I'm sure if Judge Chutkan asked Judge Merchan to allow their case to go first, I'm sure Judge Merchan would absolutely do that and allow that to occur. So we'll see what happens on August 28th when they set a timeline and they set a trial date, and they'll also set dates for motion practice, which means you have to have all of your defenses and the things you want me to look at, the sufficiency of the grand jury, the First Amendment, the venue, all of the things that the advice of counsel, all the things that they're going to argue about this indictment. The judge will give Donald Trump's lawyers a deadline to have to submit those written motions, and then they'll give the prosecution a deadline to submit those motions, and then a deadline to respond to the motions, and then they'll set a hearing date. And that will all happen probably between September, October, November. But by December, I think there's no reason this case can't go to trial around the first of the year. And somebody else was saying before, there's no procedural issues involved with classified documents the way there are in the Mar-a-Lago case with top secret clearance and all of that. So I think that Jack Smith will turn all the discovery over. They'll highlight for them, this is where, we have this much evidence, but these are the important parts. Look here, and we're ready to go.
It seems like Jack Smith's team is ready to hand over an awful lot of evidence and documents that they have to the defense.
Yeah, again, In the Mar-a-Lago case, a lot of those documents haven't been turned over because they're classified. And so until the lawyers get top secret security clearance, and that's a whole application and interview process, they can't even turn over some of the discovery in the Mar-a-Lago case. This case doesn't have those issues, so everything can be turned over right away, and the attorneys have plenty of time to prepare between now and whatever date they set. I would suspect it's early next year, maybe January, February.
How does one estimate how long a trial, once it begins, actually will last?
There's no science to it. You ask both sides. I think the judge will ask both sides how long to put in your case, prosecution.